Welcome, everybody. It's almost happy hour. Don't worry. So today we're going to talk about AI virtual teammates in security operations. There'll be a lot of buzzwords. Everybody's talking about this, but really want to show what we're doing, how we think it's different, what we're just seeing, what works, what doesn't. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So a little bit about me. I'm Chief Technology Officer for ReliaQuest. We're a cybersecurity firm. We do a security operations platform. Been in InfoSec for 25, 30 years or so. But it's, I think this is my 15th year straight at Black Hat, but been here since probably 2000. So always good to be back and good to see you guys. So let's talk a little bit about autonomous SOC, right? I think if I asked every single one of you guys in here, do you believe in autonomous SOC? I'd probably get a different answer of some yes, some no. So what does that kind of really mean, and what are we worried about for that, right? So when I hear from customers and just talking to people, right, there's a lot of legal hesitation and increased risk. So the knee-jerk reaction is, I would never trust a bunch of models to run my security operations center. And there's some truth in that for sure. So that once you get past that though, and really start thinking about, well, hey, what could that look like? Is there such a thing as semi-autonomous? And everybody in the vendor area probably have a different story on this, but I think, like, why wouldn't you want to do that, right? Or what is the risk of that? So obviously some of the things you got to worry about, the risk of a missed or incomplete asset or identity context. I think that's the big one, right? So if I unleash some LLMs into my security environment, and you guys think about kind of your environment right now, even if you had a model that was able to scale and all that, would it know enough about your environment to actually know, hey, I'm recommending to isolate this host. Do I even know what that host is? And I think that's the big risk and big pushback on when we start to talk about autonomous and really AI even doing automated actions. A lot of it, I think, comes down to context. So that's a big one, right? I think the other one is the lack of visibility into compensating controls or business logics. So if I'm going to unleash a bunch of LLMs into my business operations, would it necessarily know, or if it's recommending things, would it know that, hey, that's probably too heavy of a recommendation because it doesn't know that I already have compensating controls on the other end? For example, if I see SSH outbound or something, all right, on the surface that may look bad, and the AI may say, hey, I'm going to just shut all that access to, from the firewall going out. But if it doesn't know that, well, hey, there's actually a ACL on that's only allowing it out to certain things, you may be missing that. And then the model's not going to perform well on that. I think where it does make sense is some autonomous functions paired up with your SOC engineers and your analysts to automate some of those functions. Think tier 1, tier 2 stuff. That's something that I believe from an autonomous standpoint, you could start to do. Not every alert, would be automated all the way through. Sometimes you've got tier 3, tier 4 type of activities or IR heavy specific incidents. So think like insider threat, things like that. That's probably not a good candidate for fully autonomous SOC, at least right now. I won't say we'll never get there, but at least right now, more the tier 1, tier 2, which honestly, for the security operations center that we see and that we run, probably 80% of the alerts and the noise would fall into probably that tier 1, tier 2. So it is a significant time savings and definitely worth investing in, or at least even thinking about. So let's rewind a little bit and just level set a little bit on agentic AI in general, right? So a couple years back, generative AI really got popular and came on the scene, right? So very simple. Hey, I've got a document. Let me have some sort of prompt and I'll get a summary. At least for us, we quickly realized, hey, that's great and all, but for our use case, we needed to actually do something. If you're running a customer service chatbot, things like that, that's probably good and that's a good use case. But for us, we need to do something. So, last year, before it was really called Agentic, I guess, we started kind of developing the notion of agents of, hey, we need something more powerful to actually do stuff, right? So this notion of, hey, let's send a prompt or a question, right? We've got some agent that's able to be a little bit more powerful. Maybe that's doing an API call to do search. Maybe that's actually doing a lookup, something else to actually get some smarts and context, and then give me the summary. And that's great, and that works good. But when we're talking about security operations, that's not just one thing, especially when you're looking at incident response pipelines, incident handling, all the things that go into that. There's a typical larger workflow. And that's kind of where I think the industry has really said, hey, we need something with multiple agents. These agents need to work together. They need to collaborate. I need to be able to pass the output of my threat intel agent into my threat hunt agent so it can go do those threat hunts and things like that. So that's where you start to chain these together. Where you've got this notion of, hey, let me send over a query. It could be a query, it could be an alert, whatever it may be. And I've got a series of agents. That brings in a lot of other infrastructure, right? And for us, that was kind of the hardest part is, all right, we've been doing this for a decade plus. We know what capabilities that the SOC needs to handle. But in this world, how do we make sure that we can replicate that in an agentic framework? So being able to kind of make these agents smart enough, focused enough, know what each other wanted. If I did something in one agent, how does the other one know that it did that already? So kind of this notion of memory comes in. And I think that's where we're at now as an industry. And there's a lot of agentic frameworks that are coming out now. Ours was similarly based off to Microsoft's Agentic one. If you guys have seen that, there's been a lot of work since then. But there's a lot of that type of a framework where you've got the notion of an orchestrator coordinating all these different agents that are very specialized to do different things. So why agentic or why multi-agent? Why do we need to go to that extent? Certainly for security operations, and you guys may have seen this in your use cases as well, a lot of it is the scale and parallel processing. Early last year, we had single siloed agents that were doing specific tasks, but I didn't want to wait till they were done before I ran the next one. Maybe I want to kick off multiple hunts at the same time. Maybe I want to kick off different things that can run in parallel, because the whole goal of this is, how do I reduce my mean time to contain, my mean time to respond, all the MTTXs, right? So that's where I see the big benefit of using these agents in parallel so that you can start to do some of those things at the same time and to scale out. So whether that's capabilities or just the time it would take the analyst to go do secondary searches, I can have an agent that's doing that as well. The other big thing is how we set this up, and we'll get into kind of personas and how these roll up here in a second, but at the agent level, we really want to make sure it was granular enough so that we can have the right model for the right job. And if you guys have played with this, you know that certain models do better than others at certain things. So we wanted to say, hey, in our world, an agent is kind of like a capability. So some capabilities, for example, like code analysis, code generation, things like that, a Gemini model works fairly well because of context window and other things. So, but for reasoning and things like that, maybe a GPT model works better. So we push down kind of each agent has the ability to have their own model. There's also for cost purposes, right? So for stuff like language translation, where, hey, I've got my incident response write-up, but I've got teammates over in Spain that are doing after hours, it'd be nice to have this write-up in Spanish. I don't need the latest and greatest GPT-4o model to do that. I can use GPT-5, it's about 10 times less the cost, and we can start to optimize that as well. So really having that right model for the right job was key for scaling this out for performance and cost. The other thing is, from an agentic standpoint, the collaboration and kind of the fact checking. So one of the agents that we have is more offensive biased. And, I know everybody says, hey, you shouldn't have bias in your models. And certainly there is a time and a place that you shouldn't. But in some cases we do. And this is this case where I said, hey, I want an agent that is biased towards offensive or red team or threat actor type activities, so that I can use that to correlate and say, well, hey, if I'm running an incident response, what does my red teamer, what does my offensive person think of this recommendation or detections that would be in place? So that's a case where they're collaborating and asking amongst each other. Best case scenario, hey, I've got more context, weight my answer more. You want to start to be able to have these things work together, and sometimes that is a biased answer. And I think the big thing for multi-agentic or agentic just in general, where we've got to get to is, if I've got a security operations center, chances are you guys probably don't have every single skill that you need represented from the team. Or if you do, that person's probably doing 10 times the stuff they should, and they don't have time to get to all that. So think about your team's makeup right now. Do you guys have dedicated red teamers? Maybe, maybe not. Do you have dedicated threat hunters? Maybe you do, but maybe they only have time to do that 10% of their time. So I mean, think about how do you, basically, scale these out from a capability and scale. You want that specialized and more precise training for that. So being able to have these models have, whether it's training data or their own knowledge graph or some sort of expertise tied to this to mimic that role versus a general practitioner. The best way I can think of this is if you guys think of the kind of the healthcare analogy, right? So think about, cybersecurity agentics very similar to healthcare where, if I get sick and I go to the emergency room or I go to my general practitioner, they can do general triage. But if they see something seriously wrong, I'm going to get referred to a specialist. And that's kind of what we are, recreating with our agentic system where you've got a general, everybody calls them something different. I think Google calls them a super agent. Some people call it a orchestrator node, something like that that's been able to kind of triage and say, hey, based off of what you're asking, I know that I need to pull in my threat hunt agent to do this. So it's a way to kind of refer back to the different agents and manage that handoff. Very similar to like a general practitioner or ER doctor in the healthcare side. So what the heck are virtual teammates? Obviously that's our way of kind of saying an AI persona. And if you think about the hierarchy of this, right? You've got kind of tools that are available that every agent can use. But then how do I interface with the agent? That's where AI personas come in. And really the way to think about this is really an AI persona is really just a dynamic virtual collection of agents that's performing some task. So if I'm doing a threat hunt, maybe I want my persona to be a threat hunter. It's going to act that way and it's going to pull in the agents that it needs. I don't care and I shouldn't care, or you as a user, if I've got 100 agents, you're not going to know which ones are available, which ones I should call when. That's where the persona abstracts out. Hey, I've got a pool of agents or capabilities that I'm able to use. So you just interface with the persona and those orchestrator nodes will then pick the right agent for the right job. Especially when you've got ones that are doing specific cybersecurity tasks, but you've also got stuff that do data visualization. So think like timeline visualization and data summary and things like that. There's a lot of other agents that may come into play. And as a user, I don't care, right? And I shouldn't have to. I just want to get the job done. One of the things that we struggled with is, okay, I've got this persona. How does it, how do I relate to that? If I'm a senior analyst, I don't want the equivalent of, hey, did you reboot? Or did you try if it's plugged in or not? I want the persona to match my level where, hey, if I'm a senior analyst, give me senior recommendations or senior suggestions. If I'm a junior analyst, maybe I want the detail toned down a little bit, right? So the models and the personas had to, mimic kind of my skill set because we found it was frustrating for senior analysts to just have to go through multiple iterations to get a detailed answer. And the same way around, we found it was if we set up our prompting so that a junior analyst was overwhelmed and they had to unwind it, that's just wasting time. So we spent a lot of time really tailoring these personas to the skill level of me, the user logging in. I could still go up or down if I need to, but it should start out at that level, just not wasting time with prompting back and forth. And like we said, this is an augmentation, not a replacement. We are far from all of us getting outsourced, whatever our role is, to other models or personas, but it fills in those gaps of team capabilities or that speed or scale of IR that maybe I need to do, right? So maybe I've got one threat hunter, but I've got the work of 10. So how do we scale that out without burning out our teammates? So here's what that may look like with a sample, DFIR framework, right? So at the highest level, we've got these agents that are doing various things. They have tools that are available. Tools could be just, hey, do a CyberChef lookup to decode some encoded PowerShell. Go do a Shodan search. Go do an Nmap search. So that's kind of when we talk about tools, and the agents are just those capabilities that would call those tools. Could be an API. For us, this is how we set it up, we made the mistake early on where we said, hey, we're going to make all of our ReliaQuest security models, and that's going to be the secret sauce and where it's going to be great. Quickly realized that's kind of a fool's errand, right? Everybody has access to the latest and greatest models. You can't keep up with it. And really, that wasn't the differentiator, right? If everybody, including the threat actors, have the best models available, the differentiator has to be the context and the data that we're feeding it. And that's where we kind of took a step back and said, all right, well, hey, let's just make this more, again, the right model for the right job. We use a mix of commercial or open source models. There's a few that we do for ourselves. But what we found was the time it takes to get the training data, QA it, test it, deploy it, it was pretty much out of date, and I had to do that over and over again. So most of the time we use generative, unless it's like historical tickets and past incidents, things like that. That worked well for a classically trained model, at least right now. I think this is changing fast enough where I think we will start seeing the benefits of kind of micro models where maybe I'm saying, hey, give me a trained model on DNS or this protocol or this app, and it's very, very focused, very trained, very fast. And that is one of my agents that if I'm doing a DNS hunt, well, hey, use my DNS micro model that knows all about DNS, and it's much less, chance of hallucinations or just wasting time giving me too high level of stuff. So I think there will be a hybrid at some point. How we got around just the data side of it was heavy RAG. For us, the performance worked a lot better by doing RAG and potentially some knowledge graphs on generative models versus classically trained models. I do think there's, like I said, a space for that, but for data that doesn't change a lot, but for data that does, this worked for us. And think about all the different areas that you may need to use this. So, all the areas of your security operations center, threat research. How can I get those threat reports summarized, attribution, hopefully quicker, mapping to my, do I even care about this IOC? Does it matter for me or not based off of my vertical? Same with detections. How can I write detections faster? How can I validate and test detections faster? That's another good use case. Another one was for containment. Obviously, the name of the game of this is how fast can we do this? I could care less, honestly, and my data scientists hate when I say this, but I could care less what model I'm using, honestly. I'm looking for an outcome. And if that model can get me a better outcome and faster, that's what I'm worried about, or that's what I care about, to get that mean time to contain down. So if I can have a model that says, hey, based off this summary, I'm going to go isolate this host in less than 5 minutes, that's what I care about. I'm not worried about necessarily how I get there, but that's the end come. And certainly all my security analysts do the same way. And then the investigation, same way. How do I take that data, the mass amount of data that you guys probably have to deal with from a security alert, and distill that down to the stuff that matters? Maybe I'm a junior analyst. I don't know what curb roasting is, but now I've got a curb roasting alert that I got to deal with. How can I make sure that I'm enabling that analyst to know, well, hey, first off, what is curb roasting? What are some upstream preventative controls I can do to stop this alert from even happening? And then what are the downstream actions that I can take to clean this up or remediate it? So you start thinking about kind of all that. Everybody's got a different skill set in your SOC, being able to kind of layer that in from the investigation standpoint. And then, obviously from a response, how fast can we get to this? And that's, those, whether it's recommendations, whether it's calling APIs to isolate hosts, reset creds, any of that type of stuff. And I get that that's a fine line, right? Because what you do not want to do, we talked about this at the very beginning, I don't want to unleash my models or agents to go basically take down your production environment. So you've got to be careful with the context of that. Make sure you're tagging your assets. Again, comes back to the basics. Who does asset management well? That's hard, right? So you've got to have that in place first. Data classification, all the things that we don't want to deal with, still come into play to have that before you can start to think about automating certainly triage and remediation action items. So here's kind of what this looks like from a visual standpoint when you start piecing this together. So you've got kind of this notion of in the middle a virtual teammate or an orchestrator or some sort of director node that's able to bring in all these different agents and the different tasks that it does. And I just realized that's a little bit of an eye chart. We'll go into a little bit more detail later for that. But this is what it would visually look like is they have the ability to communicate with each other, but then also if I need to force action, I do have that main director node that can do that as well. So let's get into what some of the virtual teammates and capabilities are. And probably every one of us in here, you're going to see your roll up on this. Don't worry, we're not saying that you're going to get outsourced or replaced. But think about if you are one of these roles that we're going to go through, think about how much more you could get done or how faster you could get things done or more thorough if you had a virtual teammate that's able to augment with some of these tasks. So threat hunter, a big one, right? So recommended hunts. Maybe I'm a junior analyst, maybe I'm brand new to the company, maybe I'm brand new to cybersecurity. I don't know where to start. So what would be the recommended hunts if, say, I'm a healthcare provider? Where should I start? You have a teammate that does that. Results and outliers of summary. Biggest thing for any threat hunters in here, obviously, is if you got hundreds of thousands or millions of rows of data that's coming back, nobody wants to sift through that or have the time for that. So how can I summarize that data? What are the most important data points that I can then start with? I can still do natural language queries and go back and ask further questions, but give me a starting place, and that's what this does. And natural language querying and things like that, that's some of the, not everybody, I would say the average probably tool sets that you guys probably have in your stack, probably 5 or 6 different query languages for your endpoint, your SIMs, that type of thing. Nobody wants to learn all those languages. So being able to have just a simple query, hey, what hosts are affected by, this CVE? Simple as that. And then our AI teammate can handle that. Same with threat intelligence, right? Think about all the TTPs and detections, mapping that back to what I have in my environment. So my virtual teammate knows that, again, I'm a healthcare org, I've got these types of assets. Well, hey, based off this threat actor, am I a target? Should I worry about this? Just cutting down the noise. And those of you guys that use threat intel know that you've got to narrow that down to really what matters. And this is a way to do that. And then more importantly, hey, do I have detections already that would catch that? Or am I missing gaps in coverage? And what would those recommendations be, right? Or threat actor modeling. So this threat actor, do they care about healthcare? Are they targeting a specific technology? Is it personal? Trying to get, attribution's hard, and I don't know if we'll ever get 100% there, but being able to kind of risk model and say, hey, how likely am I to get hit with this? And you can adjust the priority that way. And then same with IOC and campaign summary. So just whatever the hack of the week is, hey, give me a quick summary that I can send out to my peers, the rest of my business of, hey, scattered spider, targeting this thing, these are the things we need to look at, and just a quick write-up that, you as security people are probably getting asked all the time, right? Here's where it gets interesting, right? Red teamer. So obviously people are using, threat actors are using AI and agents for this. We've done a lot of work on, hey, if I took my red teamer and made a campaign and gave it access to Bloodhound and Cobalt Strike and all the normal things, what could they come back with? And for us, at least the initial benefit was just automated campaigns. Hey, if I can launch a campaign and it is pivoting and privilege escalation 10 times faster than my best red teamer, that's a good value, right? Where this gets even more interesting is, well, hey, let me emulate a certain threat. Hey, would I get hit by Scattered Spider or Threat Actor of the Week? I can simulate that and mimic kind of those TTPs just from that. And then where it gets really interesting is the vuln or exploit fuzzing. So for us, we didn't go that far yet. We just said, hey, give it normal red team campaigns. What could it do? Well, now this gets interesting when you start having an agent that can do dynamic fuzzing and looking for real exploits, automating that whole chain. Again, probably wouldn't want to unleash this in a production environment, but certainly in a lab environment where certainly the bad guys are looking at this of, hey, how can I get to my end result faster? This is the next step. And I think we need to do this as defenders just to make sure that we're seeing what's happening. Another one that we had some success with is a security engineer. So think about kind of all those health alert triage, log source stopped reporting in, all those things where a lot of times it just takes a restart of the service or, hey, my creds were expired or wrong. I can automate a lot of that stuff and save a lot of time from the engineer. Vulnerability or patch prioritization. Once I know about the environment and I know what my highest risks are, that then helps me prioritize my threat report, where I'm not giving a vulnerability report to my IT team that's hundreds of rows long and they don't know where to start. We can start to be smarter about, hey, what matters, what doesn't, right? And then just health and config checks. Probably half the threat hunts that we run on a day-to-day basis across our customer base are really just looking for misconfigurations or bad things. Hey, I saw these DNS forwarders. What are my authorized DNS forwarders? I don't know. What's out there? being able to kind of run those types of hunts and config checks, open S3 buckets, things like that, just automating a lot of those things that slip through the cracks. Because as you guys know, most of the time when you get bit with something, it's the basics. And being able to kind of automate some of those checks certainly would help. OT engineer would be another good one, right? That's an area where a lot of times you don't have visibility. You're not going to have a lot of good insight. It's a blind environment. I'm not going to run through all these because I do have a few other ones, but SBOM analysis is a good one. That's something that takes a lot of time. If I'm looking for, hey, is this a vulnerable library that's in use? Certainly can automate some of that checking. AppSec is another good one. That's a shortage of, that I see across our customer base is that, application security is hard. There's a lot of different apps. Finding someone that knows every one of those and how to remediate those and detect against those takes time. So being able to kind of say, hey, what is this app actually doing? What is the risk to my business? What would be the recommended detections that I would look for? And it's not necessarily security stuff because we probably have that covered, right? Injection techniques, things like that, that's all kind of low-hanging fruit. But more fraud type stuff. Should I expect a user to do this? That's the type of detections that usually are, unless you know the app, you're not going to get there, right? Data governance, another one. Nobody likes to do data classification. So being able to go out and just analyze those documents and say, hey, does this look like a sensitive document? And at least help assist me with some initial low-level tagging. You probably still want to have your legal team go over that. But if that takes 80% of the time where you can shorten that time of data classification, another good use case. Social engineering analyst, that's another one. Broke that out from the red teamer just because we've had, probably the number one question I get is, because we'll generate deep fakes and say, just to show kind of the capabilities and how easy it is to do and all that good stuff. Number one question I get is, well, how would I know that I'm getting hit with a deep fake for my company, right? If my CFOs get hit with a BEC of a deep fake, how would I know? And that would be a good test for an agent to look for a lot of different things from a detection standpoint. There's still a long way to go on that because sometimes that's pretty hard to do, but you need to automate this at scale to be able to handle that. Obviously phishing, that's a use case that people have been using for a year. Sentiment analysis, hey, does this look like phishing or not? Things like that. And then real-time phishing analysis. Hey, I got this email. Rather than have the user submit it back up to my security operations center right then and there. And I know a lot of vendors have some of this kind of already started, but taking that to the next level to do it at scale. Incident responder, that's kind of, I think, where a lot of the industry is now, right? We have a lot of the tier 1, 2 automation, event summarization, new analyst education. That's kind of, I think, table stakes that you got to have as a minimum agent. Detection engineer, we talked a little bit about that, right? But if I could dynamically test and generate rules, that's a huge time savings for my security operations center that has to write all these detections and deploy it out, especially if I've got multiple SIMs in place. That way I can write this rule once, push it out to Splunk, push it out to all the other SIMs that I have without having to port all that over myself. Forensics is a good one. This is probably one of my favorite use cases, and I've been trying for years to get a good way to scale PCAP analysis or binary reversing, and I think this is the way to do that. We've had a lot of success with, hey, I got a malicious binary alert. I can't have an analyst go spend time to reverse that if I even have that skill in my SOC. And I certainly can't have them do that 10 times a day. So that's another good one of gathering artifacts, analyzing process trees, things like that. When you start thinking about these advanced things that really take up a lot of analyst time, perfect candidate to offshore to your virtual teammate. And then the analyst can make the decision based off of that. Compliance and risk officer, if anyone's in compliance, I'm sorry, but I don't like writing policies. You guys probably don't either, but a way to dynamically generate policies and at least take a lot of that time and off your plate, validating compliance controls, things like that from an audit function. That's another good use case. I threw this last one on there, half joking but half not, right? As a former CISO, some of you guys are probably CISOs, I'm not advocating that we can outsource our CISO role to a virtual teammate, but think about all the things that would be helpful for just gathering board or audit summary reporting, all those things that a lot of times falls on a CISO to have to kind of vet and gather and pull up. I don't want to spend my time as a CISO, but I need it, right? Same with the risk analysis or customized incident response plans, all those things that a CISO, they might like to do that, but they probably don't have the time to do that. And certainly not keeping pace with how the business is changing and how dynamic it is. So another good, think about kind of if you guys have a vCISO, turning that into an agent and what that would look like. So here's kind of what this would look like in a real alert, right? So if you had a user that, say you had an alert that a user was offboarding, what you would probably want to do is go run a threat hunt, right? To say, hey, what does this user do in the last week or so? And I can tell you in my past life doing these types of investigations, that could take hours to do this. I may not have that much time if the employee's getting walked out the door, right? So being able to just kind of say, hey, did this user, were they always clicking on phishing emails? Do they always violate all of our policies? Being able to do that. Certainly go to my CASM agent or my asset management agent, identify the assets associated with that user, all the different identity sources that are scattered around the environment, go see what all those are, because most of the time that gets forgotten, right? And then go into my triage phase. And this would be kind of the traditional, all right, well, now the analyst has to actually do something, but you just save them probably half the time by automating that first part of that, right? So correlating those researches, summarizing the findings, things like that. And then what do I do about that? In the case where an employee is getting maybe walked out the door right now, I may want to reset or isolate those hosts or credentials immediately. So being able to kind of do those immediate responses. And then maybe I want to longer term kick off a forensic hunt to go see, well, hey, let me dig deeper into this, but at least I've stopped the bleeding and I'm not worried about them logging in when they get to their car or something like that. I think where we were beginning of the year, and I think where probably a lot of other vendors are in here, is generating that write-up, and hey, here's our summary and recommendations. But I may want to do, interactive queries on other evidence, or I may want to kick off another hunt. So I do think this is important to have that interactivity where you can, basically, further ask questions or ask more detailed questions. Some of you may have seen this slide before. So why does this matter, right? So when we're talking about virtual teammates, how fast can we react to these things? And I'm picking on a couple of my researchers that just walked in. They do a lot of this work of, hey, what are those advanced AI risks and threats that we need to worry about, right? So forget about how hard it is to build out the framework to do just kind of the run-of-the-mill stuff. We also have people actively attacking, the frameworks that we're building, right? So here's a couple examples that were found of, being able to generate commands based off a description. So it takes Script Kiddie to a next level, right? So I'm not the best criminal mastermind, but if I want to start, doing attacks and I know nothing, I can start, describing what I want and being able to kind of generate commands or maybe scripts to do that, right? Certainly with automation and orchestration capabilities, bad guys want to use that also. Think about automated red team campaigns, things like that. That's a lot of work that we do to make sure, hey, how good can they get and how fast does our detections need to be? So as defenders, we can then model how we're building this, what agents do we need, what capabilities do we need, based off of how advanced the red teamers are getting. And then, of course, we talked a little bit about deep fakes and things like that. Just the time it takes to generate those, the quality gets better and better. And that's always a concern, right? That was the original use case, I think, for, I think a lot of threat actors using AI, and it certainly continues on. So also, if you think about, outside of cybersecurity, right, there's a lot of things that, if you guys are responsible for your security operations center or building up the teams or getting your teams, capable, there's a lot of kind of things outside of that that can also certainly benefit from an agentic framework or virtual teammates, things like that. So think about this kind of, development and delivery style, where maybe it could be detections, but it could also be other pieces of code. How do I automate those, test those, push those out? The traditional CI/CD pipelines may not be fast enough. Maybe I need to be more flexible. And that's where you can start to layer in some of these agentic AI capabilities. Same with the business logic, right? If you look at kind of what SOAR, SOAR's been around for a while. I don't know if everyone's maximizing it, at least from what I've seen. But if you think about kind of, hey, what does that look like when I start to weave in AI capabilities into my decision-making process for workflows and things like that? it's not just cybersecurity, right? There's business processes, things like that, that I can now start adding in that just makes that much more valuable, right? R&D is kind of a given, right? Nobody has enough time to look into all this. But if I can kick off agents to go say, hey, I'm interested in this, go do some research. And if you guys have played with DeepSeek or Deep Research, kind of bringing back that level, but then also, all right, well, what do I do with that? Do I write tests for that? Do I write scripts for that? What do I take actions off of that, right? And this kind of goes into that continuous intelligence and adaptation of, I've got to continuously be looking at this. The threats are always evolving. I've got to be able to stay on top of this, and nobody has enough time to do that. So what are some cybersecurity specific use cases that we're talking about? So obviously, I'll skip ahead a little bit, just predictive cybersecurity in general. I mean, that's the goal that we want to get to, right? Security's been reactive for the most part of probably most of our careers. So how do we just make that move to, more predictive type of, security operations center, right? Integrating a lot of those third-party AI models for additional context. So we talked about how these different threat intel agents and capabilities can be weaved in to get that extra context, takes that to the next level. And that's, for at least our product roadmap, that's the number one thing they're working on is what are those capabilities that we're missing that we can do? With the goal being complete autonomy, at least for certain functions. Like we talked about at the beginning, autonomous SOC, are we there yet? Are we not? Everyone probably has their own opinion, but I think we're all marching towards that goal as best that we can get, and that's kind of what gets us there. From an agentic AI standpoint, where this gets interesting, right, is start to setting up digital twins or ghosts, right, for scaling or simulations. We talked a little bit about, hey, I need to emulate this threat actor, or hey, I just did a merger or acquisition of a whole other business unit. What does that look like when it's meshed into my network? Being able to kind of set that up. So it's taking that lab concept to the next level. I mean, all of you would probably set up kind of Terraform and Ansible scripts to kind of automate some of these lab environments. But I think this takes that to the next level where it can start to adapt and react dynamically rather than kind of a static lab setup. We talked a little bit about the AI personas earlier, but really just pushing the limits on that interactivity, right? I mean, all of us have probably dealt with ChatGPT and, just customer service bots and various things. And obviously, if that could be tailored towards me, I'm more likely to use it and more likely to have a better interaction. So we've done a lot of work on our side of how do we make that more, personable, relatable to me, relevant to me. We talked about the example of, hey, if I'm a senior analyst, don't give me base level recommendations, that type of stuff. But it's also more than that, right? So if we're talking about, hey, if I have, a particular background or a particular skill set or likes or dislikes, weaving that in so that I'm more relatable to that user as a persona, right? And a lot of this gets to kind of, mesh agentic systems, or when you start talking about, well, hey, I've got third-party AI that I want to integrate with. That's certainly something that's on our radar of, well, hey, as a consumer, and we're no different than you guys, even though we're a security company, we've got vendors that are having AI into their products. Maybe I want to grab that context and bring it in and give it extra context for what I'm doing, and vice versa. We have customers that say, hey, you've got a lot of intel and insights and risk modeling based off my environment. I would love to take that and have my business analytics team do some additional modeling and reporting for the rest of the business. So be able to kind of tie these together, and as people scale this out, it is going to quickly kind of scale out infinitely. And then, of course, you've always got the age-old question, is that really true AGI or not? And depending on who you ask, depending on what model you're talking about, sometimes we're there, sometimes we're not. But I think the goal for everybody, whether you say we're there or not, that's kind of where we're trying to get to. Really, how do we automate the decision-making? Will we ever get there? I may not want it to, right? I may be in a critical infrastructure environment where I don't want fully autonomous things running wild in my environment without some guardrails. But for other functions, I do. So I think we still have to keep chasing that so that we can see kind of what's possible, and then scale it back if needed. So that being said, I'll wrap up. I know it's almost before happy hour. We got a few minutes. I'll come off to the side if there's any questions, but thanks, everybody. Or want to see a demo of some of this, we're at booth 3040 if you guys want to see this in action.